Hi, my name is Vic.
And I'm Wayne,
We are the bridge.
between buyers and sellers.
Hello. Today we're going to be talking about the SBA program that's just been reiterated as of June 1st.
I think it's important for us to discuss some of the changes, and some of the changes are how it used to be and reverting back to that recently. What's one of the main changes that you see, Vic?
One of the main changes reverting backwards is that now they are going to require, if the down payment is included from a seller carry note as part of the calculation to get the loan, that they're going to do a standby for the full 10 years,
Right.
which would be a problem for any seller.
Right. So important to have enough money for that down payment if you could stand alone, right?
Right.
From a
So
buyer's
it's
point.
interesting, on an SBA loan, it's actually, you can't have too little money and you can't have too much money. Potentially qualify for an SBA loan if you have the correct background, correct business experience, and you're buying a business that makes sense financially. So really, for people to apply for a loan, they're nitpicking. Either this person's not good enough, this person's too good, oh, this person's just right. So that is one of the tricks in getting an SBA buyer to get approved. So this is both a challenge for the seller and buyer.
So on the other end of that, you need enough, obviously, for the down payment of the business, and working capital, reserves, and things like that. So you kind of got to be just right. Then that's what you're saying.
That's right. And you did point out a good point, because now the minimum cash injection from the buyer is 10%. You cannot split the 10% up, from my understanding.
With the seller. Okay,
Right.
exactly.
So if the buyer puts in 10% and we want to increase the cash injection, we could use the seller carry note of another 5 or 10%. But it would be much better to come in as a buyer with 15% cash injection, good credit, a strong background, and then we work with a different lender that can give you a much better rate. So the rates are going to vary anywhere from 8 to 13% on an SBA loan, depending on your entrepreneurial skills, depending on your credit scores, and depending on your financial position.
And aren't fees back
And the fees are back.
on top of that rate?
Right. So the fees are built on top of that light rate, but the one good thing is you do get working capital built into the loan when you do an SBA loan.
Depending, obviously, if the business qualifies from there.
Right.
And then who can get an SBA loan? That's changed slightly.
Go ahead and explain.
So now it is American citizens. But before it was a little bit looser, where you had outside investors coming in, but now it's back to the old way. We're U.S. citizens.
Right. So I want to just clarify on the point of the cash injection. If the seller carry note is not included as part of the down payment in the calculation by the bank, the standby will not be required. And that's very important for the transaction to actually be a win-win relationship between the seller and buyer. Because most sellers are selling for the purpose of retiring. So why would you want to wait 10 years before your first payment? You might not even be around in 10 years. But the risk is the business might not be around in 10 years. We don't know that. The point is, a seller wants to start getting paid 30 days after the seller carry note is made.
Yeah, for a seller to hand over that responsibility, wait around 10 years, and hope that the buyer does a better job than them.
And I meant the first payment, by the way, after 30 days, not
Yeah.
the total note, to clarify.
From there.
So,
Any other changes?
not that I can think of.
No, I think it's always fluid with the SBA, and I think it's important because we have relationships with many, many lenders. So depending on the type of business, depending on the qualifications of the buyer, that's where we can bridge that gap and get those questions answered, because it is always fluid.
That's an excellent example, actually, because we just listed a really solid business. It was an e-commerce business out of Sparks, Nevada. Has good financials, it's making the cash flow, the P&Ls, profit and loss statements match with the tax returns. We got it pre-approved by 3 banks. Why would anybody go to 3 banks? Because there's different types of buyers. The first bank that I went to was the one that I'm talking about, the 15% cash injection. We got a buyer for that business who has 3 e-commerce businesses, has a very high credit score, has the right background, and he's actually been offered by a different bank interest rate slightly below 8%, which in our experience is unheard of.
Phenomenal.
Because the last SBA loan we did, which was a small SBA loan of just under 100,000, was at 13.5. The other SBA loans that we've seen completed were at 11.5. So to be able to get below 8% on an SBA loan for what he's getting about 1.5 million approximately,
Yep.
That's a tremendous deal. So the reason for the three banks is that was for the high quality buyer with a good credit score, proper business experience, and the appropriate amount of money. Not too much, not too little. This gentleman had it on the high side. In most cases, we might have to go to lender 2 or 3, and the lender 2 or 3 are going to take a cash injection of 10%, and they are going to have different ways of looking at it, and depending on the challenges that the buyer might bring to the table, or the seller brings to the table because of the way the business is operated, either way, that type of loan is not going to get as good of an interest rate. That one might be in that more of that 10 to 12% range. So the difference of a payment on a 12.5% note or 11.5% note versus 8% is substantial when you're taking out $1.5 million.
And less in your pocket. So you can see there's many variables for a first-time buyer trying to get an SBA loan, and a lot of factors involved on both sides. And that's where we come into play, where we can help guide you through that process, because it can be very overwhelming. You know, a lot of people have never had an SBA loan before. They've heard of it, but that's where we come into play.
And we should all be careful, because on the SBA loans, the bankers have a tendency to quote about 60 days. In my experience, even with the best buyer and the best seller, everybody being cooperative, getting all the information back on a timely basis, about the quickest I've personally seen completed is 90 days. And it seems to be pretty consistent.
It does.
Except for sometimes it gets longer.
It's a process.
But all of the loans we've done have been right around that 90-day mark, with exception of one, and that was a one-off. So with exception of that, it's about a 90-day process. So expect to be patient, expect to be responsive, and provide all the information the bank wants on a timely basis.
So Vic, what are some other alternatives to financing and buying a business other than the SBA loan?
Other alternatives would include a seller carry note if the owner of the current business is willing to carry a note for the buyer. Mm-hmm. Another one would be using your 401k and going through a company to have it professionally rolled over, and there's a lot of rules to what's called a ROBS transaction, and you'll have to look it up. But there are people like Guidant Financial that can take you through using your 401k to invest in your own business.
Okay.
The other type of loan you could get is you could get a personal loan at a bank.
Yeah.
You could get a home equity line of credit, which is most often referred to as a HELOC loan. And then finally, you could also do a hard money loan to get a business. So there are people out there that specialize in providing hard money loans to businesses. When you get on the larger scale of businesses, you could actually seek money from a venture capitalist.
Let's talk about advantages, disadvantages. So HELOC, we've got a lot of people, especially in Nevada, who've moved from other states. They've sold their house, they've come to Nevada where houses are cheaper, and so they have a lot of equity in there. So I know one of the advantages is the rate of interest, right? Where,
right.
You know, what your mortgage company, if it's Wells Fargo or Bank of America, are offering you on that. Obviously, one of the pros is you are putting your house on the line if something goes wrong with that business, so a bit of a risk. So we've got it on both sides there.
Although that's a true statement, Wayne. Remember, when you get a loan from the SBA that's in excess of $500,000, you are going to be required to put your house up as security for that loan.
Yeah.
So you are going to be risking you're going to collateralize your home to get an SBA loan in excess of $500,000. So that's also there.
HELOC's a great alternative for those smaller deals.
Yes.
Out there. When we talk about the 401k, a lot of people have had a job with a company maybe for 20 years and built up a huge 401k. So we know that's accessible to them. So that's great. They're not coming out of pocket on there. Talk to me about the hard money. What's the pros and cons there?
Hard money, you can get the money pretty quickly. You can get the money from multiple avenues. The disadvantage of a hard money loan is the interest rate. The interest rate is high. And if you don't pay it back, the ramifications could be detrimental to the success of your business.
So quick is good. If you've got a seller who wants to sell it real quick, you want to buy it, that's great.
Right.
disadvantage.
As long as you have the ability to replace that loan, or you can pay it off in a quick, timely basis. So if you can pay off that hard money loan in 12 months, it may or may not make sense. You're going to have to go to your accountant and figure out the math to see if it actually works. Speaking of accountants, I think the business brokers should be letting all buyers and sellers know when there are contracts that need to be reviewed. We do advise you to use your lawyers for the contracts. We do advise you to use accountants for the financial information. We are business brokers and we specialize in assisting the matchmaking of buyers and sellers, but we are not lawyers and we are not CPAs.
So Vic, you had mentioned a seller carry note at the beginning
Okay.
of the financial alternative. So can you explain to everyone what that is actually?
So a seller carry note can actually be the most preferred choice by a buyer. That is, you are getting a loan from the seller and he or she keeps skin in the game of the business. So if the seller of a business decides that they'll loan a buyer, let's say 10% of the value of the business. So $2 million would mean it's a $200,000 loan. So you're going to need to do a seller carry note, which the paperwork would be processed in our case through escrow for that seller carry note. The terms would be negotiable between the buyer and seller. So on a $200,000 note, let's say you would take it out for 5 years. Possibly that interest rate on a seller carry note is going to vary anywhere from about 6% to 14%, depending on the business situation. Usually more in that area of 5 to 8%, simply because this is helping the seller to sell the business with no fees on the loan, a good interest rate on the loan,
Right.
and a quick turnover, because all you have to do is write the seller carry note paperwork and terms, right? So let's just make it up. I'll take 200,000, Wayne. I'd like to have it for 5 years at 8%.
Right.
And then, of course, we would have to show the approximate payment as well.
So when we're discussing pros and cons as a buyer, if I don't have quite enough funds to do that, basically you're going to become the bank then for me, so to speak, and help me purchase your business by carrying that, which is great. I think as a buyer also, it shows that I'm not buying a lemon, as you said, skin in the game. So
Right.
you've got confidence in your business. So on both sides on that. So as a seller, obviously, you're showing that you believe in your business, so I'm going to make enough money to pay you back. But as the risk is obviously, if I'm not successful, then there is a chance that the funds won't come back to you, correct?
That's correct.
So you've got plus and minuses on both sides on something like that.
And there's another con for the seller. Most of the time when sellers are selling the business, as I mentioned previously, it's for the purpose of retiring.
Yeah.
So when you're preparing to retire, you're trying to allocate all of your funds toward retirement, and you don't want to take as much risk as possibly doing a seller carry note, although it does leave skin in the game.
Yeah.
Right? So, but there are a lot of sellers that when they sell their business, they want to be free and clear of the business, other than the transition period, which is important to most sellers, to give an appropriate transition period to the buyer to ensure their success.
So I imagine there might be different tax liabilities on something like that, getting all the money up front when I sell my business, or you paying me yearly.
As a business broker, I would recommend that a buyer would take this information to their CPA and have it analyzed.
Because they're the specialist, right, when it deals with taxes, correct?
Right. But if you think about it, most likely a CPA, if you don't take all the money this year and you take money this year, and whatever money you take in the following years, you're taxed based on money that you collect in any given year. And that's all I'll say about that. Other than that, go to your CPA.
Yeah, so it might be beneficial. Everybody's in a kind of a different tax boat, right?
Right.
And the same with consulting a lawyer, right? When we talk about this is a basically legal transaction which has happened. So we know what we do very well, and we stay in our lane as a business broker.
That's right. And then we refer the other people, 3 at a time, to buyers, and they can make a choice of which vendor they'd like to use, what lawyer, what CPA, what licensing specialist, whatever the application is at that time.
If they don't already have their own.
True.
I own a dental practice here in Henderson, and I'm interested in selling. I also own the building, but I'm not sure if I should include that in the sale or sell it separately. Do you have any suggestions?
Dental practices are an interesting business to sell in Vegas, just because the only person that can buy the dental practice is a dentist, unless it's a private equity group or an investor that has a dentist to be placed into that office and put their name on it. So we do have a dental practice listed, and that is the challenge of it. If they own the piece of real estate, there are several things to consider before we determine whether he should sell it or not. The dentist that owns the building needs to consult with his CPA if it makes economic sense to sell it in conjunction with the business. As business brokers, we have a real estate license and a business broker permit, so we can certainly sell the building if it makes economic sense for the dentist to do that. Once again, that's taking all the money for the business this year, all the money for the building this year. So we strongly recommend go to the CPA to make sure that makes sense. Can we do it? Absolutely. Does it make sense? That will be determined on a case-by-case basis.
So there might be a situation that I want residual income, and I may want to become that landlord, correct? And
Absolutely.
not sell the business, and that could be
The
an
building.
advantage, the building from something like that. Or I might just say, I'm done with this, and I want to get rid of the whole thing all at once. So depending on what your end goal is, and we know that real estate usually tends to go up in value, so maybe you want to hold that for another 5 or 10 years. Do you want the headache of being a landlord? Something breaks, you've got to fix it. So I think it's on a case-by-case basis and what your end goal is.
And one of the things I want to put a total side note to the question, when a business owner like this dentist owns the building, it's very important that that dentist is paying himself fair market rent and it's being registered on the profit and loss statement and the tax return. If that dentist is not paying himself fair market rent and he's paying less than he should be, then that will be detrimental to the value of his business.
I could see that where maybe someone is just charging himself $1,000 a month when it should be 10,000. So as a buyer, if I look at the P&L and only see rent is 1,000, I know that really I've got to go by the market value of what he's going to be charging me. Correct?
That's correct. And as a business broker, I would advise the buyer to take 9,000 times 12.
Yep.
Okay. That number would then be a negative add back in a market price analysis, otherwise known as a business valuation.
So very important when we're looking
Yes.
at that.
I want to start my own pet grooming business, but I'm not sure if it would be better to buy an existing shop or just open my own. Can you offer any guidance or suggestions?
Well, I think that's a really good question, Mila, and we thank you for that. Would you like to touch on that, Wayne?
Yeah, so disadvantages and advantages. Let's start right there. If you're buying an existing business, you've already got traffic coming in. You've got some history, some books, and so you can see what the business is doing. Is it the right location in town, right? So there's an advantage to that. The disadvantage is you are paying for an ongoing business. Now, let's compare that to setting up a brand new business. It's finding a location and basically also having it fitted out. So when we're talking about pet grooming, maybe pet boarding in there, you've got to look at the local regulations, ordinances of and spending the money on that building to have it fitted out. So you're going to have probably have permits because there's going to be additional plumbing, there's going to be additional electricity. Do they even allow loud dogs barking in that strip mall or wherever you're going to set up? So I think that's pros and cons on both sides. What do you think, Vic?
I think that starting from scratch, although some people would think that that would be more economical, is actually not the case. The reason is because you're going to have to spend time and money. You're going to have to spend time. You're going to pay rent on a building that's not producing any income. You have to do the tenant improvements, and as you said, Wayne, you have to get the permits.
Yeah.
In this day and age, even though now those permits are, I believe, required, it can be asked electronically, it's actually a slower process than it was pre-COVID. So the permitting can take time. So now your build out can take 6 to 12 months, and you're paying rent for that 6 to 12 months with no income coming in. So wouldn't it be better, as you said, Wayne, to buy a business that has existing infrastructure, has potentially some employees, additional groomers, has the build out, and most importantly, already has a client base? You could take this business that you purchase and you can take it to the next level by implementing social media marketing, by doing, a website, by doing local postcards, there's so many different avenues in today's day and market that you could take a business that's generating $100,000 in income, and you could potentially scale that business if you have someone that's able to market the business well.
Because how long is it going to take to ramp up a brand new business if we're talking about daycare? Are we taking it from competitors? If you buy an existing business, we know what's coming, inside the door, and it could take 6 months, 12 months, or a couple of years to get that. And we've seen the outfitting, we've seen some extreme examples. When we talk about restaurants, everybody wants to start up a new restaurant. For grease traps, for hoods, and those type of things are very expensive when it comes to permitting and getting that done. Maybe a doggy daycare or groomers, it might be a little bit cheaper because I imagine you need a little bit less. So pros and cons to both sides, but generally buying an existing business which is proven and you've got a track record is a lot more economical, as you said, than
Right.
starting from
And that's
scratch.
also why people that are in the business, they look to do strategic acquisitions because that's quicker growth. You just received that additional gross revenue. You already own a business, so you already have a foundation for your expenses, which some of them between your business that exists and the new business might be repetitive. So any of those expenses that you can save adds value to the new business. In other words, money into your pocket. So that's actually the quickest way to grow a business is through strategic acquisition.
So today we've covered a lot of alternatives to financing and buying your business and to hopefully making your dream come true with the pros and cons of each side.
We do want to thank you for listening to us today, and if you should have additional questions, please reach out to Wayne and I, and we'll be happy to speak to you.
Thank you.